Richard Alden, a 55-year-old billionaire who seemingly has it all. He owns a global empire, resides in a mansion that could rival palaces, and has 4 sons, Michael, Evan, Jacob, and Thomas. But despite his immense wealth, Richard feels an emptiness growing inside him. His sons, all driven by their own greed, seem more interested in their inheritance than in building a relationship with him. Richard spends his days managing his empire, his nights alone in a mansion that no longer feels like a home. Each of his sons is off chasing their own ambitions, paying little attention to their father. Richard tries to connect with them, hoping to find solace in family, but every interaction reminds him that they care more about his money than about him. One stormy evening, Richard's car breaks down in a rundown part of the city. While waiting for his driver to fix the car, something catches his eye. Amidst the trash piled along the street, a faint, desperate cry cuts through the sound of the rain. He steps out, his expensive shoes splashing into the puddles as he approaches the sound. There, wrapped in a torn blanket, is a baby boy, barely 10 months old. The child is covered in dirt, shivering and weak, his cries almost too faint to hear. Richard's heart, usually hardened by years of dealing with ruthless business dealings, softens at the sight. Without a second thought, he scoops the child into his arms. The rain pours harder as Richard hurries back to the car, the boy clinging to him. That night, he makes a decision that will change both of their lives forever. Despite his son's protests and his advisor's concerns, Richard brings the boy into his mansion, adopting him and naming him David. But while Richard's heart feels fuller, the cracks in his family grow deeper. Part 2. The Outsider in a Rich World. As David grows, his presence in the Alden household becomes a source of tension. While Richard adores him, treating him like the son he never had, his biological sons view David as an outsider. Michael, the eldest, is the most vocal in his disdain. He often reminds David that he was picked up from the garbage, making sure the boy never feels truly at home. David, however, proves to be different from the rest of the family. Where Michael, Evan, Jacob, and Thomas spend their days indulging in luxury, David works hard, focusing on his studies, always trying to please the man who saved him. He looks up to Richard with admiration, viewing him not just as a father, but as a hero who gave him a second chance at life. Despite the cruelty from his brothers, David's bond with Richard deepens. They spend evenings talking in the study, Richard teaching him about the family business, about life, and about the importance of loyalty. But while Richard sees David as the future of his legacy, the other sons grow more resentful. One fateful day, when David is about 16, a family heirloom goes missing, an ancient, valuable watch that belonged to Richard's father. Michael, quick to act, accuses David of the theft. He gathers his brothers and convinces Richard that David, with his street roots, has finally shown his true colors. Richard, torn between his love for David and the pressure from his other sons, reluctantly confronts David. The accusation feels like a betrayal. David, who has always been loyal, stands in disbelief as the man he calls father accuses him of theft. Tears well in David's eyes, but his words fall on deaf ears. In a moment of weakness, Richard orders David to leave the house. Part 3. A life in exile. David, heartbroken and abandoned, leaves the mansion with nothing. He walks the streets of the city, the very streets where he was found years ago. Memories of the life he once had flash before him, dinners in the grand dining hall, evenings spent in his father's study, the feeling of being loved. But now, all of that is gone. He spends the first few nights sleeping in parks, his thoughts consumed by the betrayal. He wonders how a man who once loved him could so easily believe he was a thief. He also reflects on the brothers who had never accepted him, who had always viewed him as a threat. But David, though shattered, refuses to give up. He begins working odd jobs, cleaning, delivering packages, anything that will earn him enough to survive. His mind, however, is always on the future. He refuses to let his circumstances define him. Slowly but surely, David begins to rise. Years pass. David, now in his 20s, has built a small business from the ground up. Through sheer determination and hard work, he grows his company into a successful venture. It's not easy. There are failures along the way, and the journey is fraught with challenges. But David's resilience pays off. Still, despite his success, a part of him remains tied to the past. He often thinks about Richard, the man who had once been his father, and wonders what has become of him. Part 4. The Fall of an Empire. Meanwhile, back at the Untold mansion, things have taken a dark turn. Without David's influence, Richard's sons have spiraled into greed and incompetence. They squabble among themselves, more concerned with dividing the family fortune than with running the business. Richard watches helplessly as the empire he spent his life building begins to crumble. His sons, now grown men, are consumed by infighting. Michael, still the eldest and most ambitious, tries to assert control, but his arrogance blinds him to the reality of the situation. Evan, Jacob, and Thomas, each more interested in personal gain than in the family business, contribute to the chaos. The business, once the pride of the Olden family, starts to falter. Profits dwindle, clients pull out, and slowly the empire begins to collapse. Richard, desperate to save what's left, makes a decision that will haunt him. He takes out a massive loan, mortgaging the mansion, the one place that still holds meaning for him. For a time, the money keeps the business afloat, but it's only a temporary solution. As the loan's due date approaches, it becomes clear that there's no way to repay it. When the time comes, and Richard can't fulfill his financial obligations, the bank moves to auction the mansion. The house, once filled with laughter, now stands on the edge of being lost forever. Part 5. The Auction. On the day of the auction, Richard stands outside his beloved mansion, watching strangers gather to bid on the home he once shared with his sons. His heart feels heavy, not just with the loss of his house, but with the knowledge that his empire is gone, and his sons have abandoned him. None of them are present to support him, each having scattered to pursue their own interests after the business collapsed. As the auction begins, Richard feels a profound sense of loss. He stands alone, a shadow of the man he once was, his fortune gone, his family torn apart. The auctioneer starts calling out numbers, and bids are placed quickly. The price of the mansion rises higher and higher, each bid another reminder of everything Richard has lost. Just as the final bid is about to be called, a voice from the back of the crowd interrupts the auctioneer. The crowd parts as the bidder steps forward, and to Richard's astonishment, it's David, the boy he had cast out so many years ago. David, now a successful entrepreneur in his own right, places a bid so high that no one else can compete. The auctioneer, stunned, slams down the gavel. The mansion belongs to David. Part 6. A Tearful Reunion. Richard can hardly believe his eyes. The boy he once loved, the boy he had accused of theft and thrown out, now stands before him, not as a beggar, but as a man who has reclaimed the very home Richard lost. Tears fill Richard's eyes as he approaches David. The weight of the years, the guilt of his betrayal, and the pain of losing everything all come crashing down. Richard, once a proud and powerful man, now finds himself humbled before the son he wronged. "I don't deserve your kindness," Richard whispers, his voice breaking. "I threw you away, just like the garbage I found you in." David, looking at the broken man before him, feels a mix of emotions. There's pain, yes, but also compassion. He sees not the billionaire who wronged him, but the father who had once saved his life. "You gave me everything when I had nothing," David says, his voice calm but firm. "Now, it's my turn to do the same. Richard falls to his knees, weeping. David, moved by the sight, kneels beside him and wraps his arms around the man who had once been his father. For the first time in years, Richard feels the warmth of a family, not from his biological sons, but from the son who had been cast aside. Part 7. A New Beginning. With the mansion now in David's possession, the weight of the past begins to lift from Richard's shoulders. But this is not the end of their journey. It's the start of something new. David doesn't just stop at reclaiming the house. He has a bigger plan in mind. The Alden Empire, once a symbol of power and success, had crumbled under the weight of greed and negligence, but David believes it can be rebuilt. He approaches Richard with an offer that goes beyond financial help. "I don't just want to give you back your home," David says. "I want to rebuild everything, together." Richard is stunned by the offer. After everything that happened, after all the betrayal and pain, David is still willing to help him. But David isn't doing this out of vengeance or a need to prove himself. He's doing it out of love, the kind of love that transcends blood. With David's leadership and fresh vision and Richard's years of wisdom, they begin working together. They decide to rebuild the Alden business from the ground up, this time with new values: trust, transparency, and loyalty at its core. The business shifts away from the ruthless practices that once defined it and instead focuses on innovation, social responsibility, and ethical dealings. Over time, the business not only recovers, but grows into something far more successful than before. With David's modern approach and Richard's guidance, the Alden name becomes synonymous with integrity and progress. The world sees this unlikely father-son duo rise from the ashes, proving that even the most broken bonds can be mended. As their business flourishes, Richard's other sons, Michael, Evan, Jacob, and Thomas, return, driven by guilt and shame for abandoning their father. At first, David is hesitant to let them back into their lives. The wounds they inflicted on him are deep, and he hasn't forgotten the cruelty they showed him. But Richard, humbled by his experiences, encourages David to forgive. "Family isn't just about the blood we share," Richard tells him one evening. "It's about the bonds we build, the trust we earn. They lost their way, just like I did, but they can change, just like I did." David, still cautious, agrees to give them a second chance, but this time the roles are reversed. The once proud sons who had looked down on David now look up to him, knowing that it's his strength, wisdom, and compassion that brought the family back from the brink of ruin. The brothers, seeing the transformation in both their father and David, begin to change as well. They apologize for the years of neglect and the wrongs they committed. Slowly, they work their way back into the family, not as rivals for power, but as men who have learned from their mistakes. In time, the Alden family becomes whole again, not through wealth or status, but through the lessons learned in loss, forgiveness, and redemption. David's story, from being abandoned as a child to becoming the savior of the family that once cast him out, becomes a powerful symbol of perseverance and unconditional love. Richard, now in his later years, finds a sense of peace that he never had before. He spends his days not as a lonely, broken man, but as a father surrounded by his children, both biological and adopted, who have finally come together. And as for David, he becomes the true heir to Richard's legacy, not because of a birthright, but because he earned it through his resilience, hard work, and love. The boy who was once found in the garbage now stands as a pillar of strength, proving that no matter where you come from, it's where you're headed that defines your worth. In the final scene, the Alden family gathers around the dining table, a place once filled with tension and silence. Now, laughter fills the room. David sits at the head of the table, next to Richard, who smiles with pride. The house, which was once up for auction, is now filled with warmth and unity, and as they share a meal, It's clear that the wealth that truly matters isn't found in bank accounts or empires. It's found in the love and loyalty of a family that fought its way back from the edge of destruction. Conclusion: the power of love and forgiveness. In the end, the Alden family's story is not one of wealth or power, but of something far more valuable: redemption. Life had a way of humbling Richard Alden, stripping away the illusions of control and the false security of riches, revealing the raw truth. Family is not built on inheritance or entitlement, but on love, sacrifice, and forgiveness. David, once left to die in the streets, had every reason to become bitter, to let the world's cruelty define him. He could have walked away forever, turned his back on the man who betrayed him, and sought his own success without looking back. And yet, when the time came, David chose a path few could follow, the path of mercy. His heart, though scarred by the rejection of the family he had loved, was never hardened. Instead, it was filled with compassion, not just for Richard, but for the brothers who had never accepted him. When David returned, it wasn't as a conqueror, looking to reclaim what was his. It wasn't about revenge or proving his worth. It was about saving the man who had once saved him, despite the hurt and the accusations. David understood something that no amount of wealth or privilege could ever teach. Forgiveness is the ultimate act of love. And as he stood before the mansion on that fateful day, bidding to save the very home where he had once been cast out, David didn't just buy back a house. He reclaimed the heart of a father who had lost his way. In doing so, he restored the dignity of a man who had been broken by his own mistakes. Richard, once a man consumed by the fear of losing everything, finally realized that the greatest loss he could ever endure wasn't material. It was the loss of family. And yet, in his darkest hour, the son he had wronged became the light that guided him back to hope. Through David, Richard found redemption, not through business deals or wealth, but through the love of a son who chose grace over bitterness. As tears flowed down Richard's face, it wasn't just for the house he almost lost or the business that collapsed. It was for the time he wasted, for the love he had failed to nurture, and for the son he had almost let slip away. But in that tearful embrace, the past was washed away, and what remained was the unshakable bond between a father and his son, stronger, deeper, and more meaningful than anything Richard had ever built. The mansion may have been saved, the business rebuilt, but what mattered most was the family that found its way back together. The Alden name was no longer about wealth or status. It was about resilience, love, and the power of forgiveness. For the reader, this story is a reminder of the things that truly matter. It's easy to become lost in the pursuit of success, to let pride and greed pull us away from the people who mean the most. But in the end, when the walls come crashing down, it's not money that will comfort us. It's the love we gave, the forgiveness we granted, and the relationships we fought to keep alive. David's journey from the streets to the boardroom wasn't just a triumph of will. It was a triumph of the human spirit. He didn't need a birthright or a fortune to prove his worth. He proved it through his heart, his character, and his unwavering loyalty. And in doing so, he gave his father and his entire family a second chance at life. So, as the story closes, we are left with one simple truth: love, no matter how tested or broken, has the power to heal all wounds. And in the arms of those we love, we find the real wealth of life, one that can never be stolen, destroyed, or lost. Tears may fall as you reach the end of this journey, but they are tears of hope, because no matter how far we fall, no matter how much we lose, love always has the power to lift us back up.